Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pleasure of the Text. Oh my God, what do I say?
A shared imaginative space where readers and writers make meaning together. We're your hosts, Shannon and Garrett.
Okay, well, I'm including that one. Thank you, Gareth, for the introduction. Well, today we are talking about Solaris.
We are talking about Solaris. I'm obviously at home, and Shannon, you're in a Suzanne Grey change room. Suzanne Grey's
Suzanne Grey. That was the choice you went with.
I was on the spot. What should I have said?
That's where old people go shopping, Garrett.
I don't know where people buy clothes. Do I look like someone who buys clothes? What would have been better than Suzanne Grey? Are there any futuristic sort of clothes stores to fit with our theme?
I wish I could say I also don't buy clothes that are not out of an op shop, but I would have just said Myers because there's some nice brands in Myers. Or what's the other one?
Do they have those kinds
David
of
Jones.
curtains and the brick walls? So maybe Susan. I mean, it looks like a Lowe's change room to me, but that wouldn't have been right.
Okay.
What's the ladies' equivalent of Lowe's? Is it Suzanne Grey? Did I maybe get it right after all?
The Reject Shop.
The Reject Shop. Do they have change rooms?
Best and Less.
There you go. From a Best and Less change room, Shannon is here. How's that?
Shannon is here, as opposed to the Solaris station, where some weird and crazy and wonderful things happen.
Yes,
Bring
that's
us
true.
into land for our book review, Gareth.
So Solaris, I was hoping to start with a quote, which I think is one of the great quotes that I've ever heard in terms of a writer talking about themselves and how they're received. So Stanislaw Lem in the newspaper Shag said the following, quote, "My experiences with Western critics are bad because they read my books as if they tried to find a recipe for donuts in a telephone book." I just think that's amazing.
It is very funny.
Yeah.
Have you
so
ever
what do you make of that?
They try to find something in his book that obviously is not there, and rather just reading for the pleasure of reading, there's an ulterior motive.
Yeah.
That's what I make of that.
Well, certainly there was a politicization of Lem, the great science fiction writer Philip K. Dick, who was the only American science fiction writer that Lem had any respect for. He thought Lem was a communist committee. Can you imagine a committee writing a series of novels? That's very optimistic of Dick to think that committees could write novels that were any good at all.
Hard enough to write a novel as one person.
Yeah. Can you imagine a committee? I mean, they can't even fill in potholes, these committees, so I don't think they'd get a novel written. But Dick was not a well man, and that was his theory. And yeah, Lem was a sort of a very politicized figure in many ways in Poland and in the US, and presumably also to some extent in Russia, where there was a bit of a fascination with him, but possibly an uneasy one.
Can you explain the fascination with Russia's interest in Stanislaw Lem?
Well, the reason why I say there must be one is that they actually made two film versions of Solaris, which I think is because a lot of like Russian television is state funded, so it has to get past one of those committees, of which Lem was not. So yeah, no, I get the sense that that Lem certainly had some cut through in Russia, but he was a sort of I think a difficult figure in many ways in terms of what he wrote and his ideas about individual freedom and things like that. It doesn't gel wonderfully well with the sort of the ethos of the USSR at that time. Nevertheless, for whatever reason, his work was being pushed to the forefront over there. And as I say, there were 2 film versions within 5 years of each other in Russia, long before America got on board. Was it in 2002? And Steven Soderbergh made a film version. You've made it once you've been
somehow
optioned.
He roped in George Clooney.
He did. And we're going to talk about the films later, but all 3 films for me have merit, but maybe don't work ultimately. And I wonder if Solaris is actually an unfilmable project, or if it's just a matter of no one's quite cracked it yet.
That's an interesting theory.
Yeah, but, you shouldn't start with the film, should you? You should start with the book. So we'll pop back to the book. So for this podcast, we had the idea of looking at 2 translations of this book, because originally, the English translation was actually a Polish to French to English translation. Now, Lem had a real problem with the French translation, and so by extension, he had a problem with the English translation as well. And then we have a direct English to Polish translation by Bill Johnston, which occurred in 2011. Now, that version is not in print per se, but it does exist as an ebook, and I think also as an audiobook somewhere. But there are some rights issues.
From my reading, it sounds like they're working on getting the rights for it.
Yeah. And it is a crazy situation that you can't have more than one translation. You think of all the books that have been translated multiple times. It seems very strange that isn't allowed. I rebel against the concept. But as an interesting way to start, I wanted to talk about, I found a bunch of synopses. People who are familiar with this podcast would know that I really struggle with describing what we're talking about. And so I do go looking for synopses to see how other people have described the same things. And I thought this was really interesting. So the first synopsis is from booktopia.com.au. If you've been reading the news, you'll know that Booktopia is not long for this world. It's gone into voluntary administration.
Oh, is it not?
Yeah, which is, stressful because I have an order with them. But who's to say whether I'll ever see any of that again?
I have an order with them too.
Yeah, Booktopia, they've gone under. It's sad, but, that's okay because we still have Boomerang Books, Australian listeners and viewers, boomerangbooks.com.au, giving them a plug, even though I'll get nothing back from them. Anyway, the first synopsis from booktopia.com.au, soon to be nothing. Quote, when Chris Kelvin arrives at the planet Solaris to study the ocean that covers its surface, he is forced to confront a painful, hitherto unconscious memory embodied in the physical likeness of a long-dead lover. Others suffer from the same affliction, and speculation rises among the scientists that the Solaris Ocean may be a massive brain that creates incarnate memories, but its purpose in doing so remains a mystery. Solaris raises a question that has been at the heart of human experience and literature for centuries. Can we truly understand the universe around us without first understanding what lies within? What do you think of that, Shannon, as a synopsis, having read the book twice?
I really hate the reference to Solaris being a massive brain that creates incarnate memories.
It's a stinker, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that as we go through the book, and spoilers alert, everyone who is very familiar with our podcast knows that we do love to spoil books.
Oh, yeah.
There is a lot of material on Solaris, and the concept or idea of a massive brain gets removed or rejected quite quickly, and for this to appear in a synopsis is quite ironic.
It is. It's actually, I confess I'm terrible at synopses, so I can't. I'm in a glass house here, but good God. So the first sentence is all right. The hitherto unconscious memory embodied in the physical likeness of a long dead lover. It doesn't have the panache one might hope for, because it's quite a thing, isn't it? Your long dead lover appears to you and won't go away. They suck quite a lot of the drama and the romance out of it with that sentence. But then you have these others suffering from the same affliction, and you're like, who are these others? And speculation rises among scientists.
It does kind of sound
scientists? It's bizarre.
It kind of sounds like a zombie uprising.
Doesn't it? Yeah. And then you got this terrible massive brain reference. And then it has this sentence: Solaris raises a question that has been at the heart of human experience and literature for centuries. Can we truly understand the universe around us without first understanding what lies within? I don't know about that. I don't think that's been a question that's been at the heart of literature for centuries. I mean, you might as well say it's asking a question that's been around for centuries. Will AI replace the human soul? I mean, Shakespeare was writing about that, wasn't he? It's quite a strange synopsis. It's quite terrible. I don't know if this is why Booktopia has gone under. That they allow
I
these
was just about to say a cheeky remark like that.
You got to wonder, don't you?
Rest in peace, Booktopia.
Yes. So I'm going to read you the boomerangbooks.com.au one. Now, obviously, neither of these businesses wrote these synopses. They just got them from different sources. So, and often you'll see with bookstores that they'll have multiple synopses, so you can compare and contrast and be befuddled. This one is a bit better, in my opinion. When psychologist Chris Kelvin arrives at the planet Solaris to study the ocean that covers its surface, he finds himself confronting a painful memory embodied in the physical likeness of a past lover. So a few less spoilers there. Kelvin learns that he is not alone in this, and that other crews examining the planet are plagued with their own repressed and newly real memories. Could it be, as Solaris scientists speculate? Now, this is obviously not written to be acted out. Could it be, as Solaris scientists speculate, that the ocean may be a massive neural center creating these memories for a reason no one can identify? Long considered a classic, Solaris asks the question, can we understand the universe around us without first understanding what lies within? So there's a lot of reasons why that's a better synopsis.
Agreed.
Any lingering sort of doubts about it? Improve it?
I actually prefer the one that Alison Flood managed to pull together in her article.
Can I hear that one?
Not that this... Yeah, sure. I'm just saying that I don't think there's anything wrong with this one. It just is very lackluster.
You can see it's from the same source as the other one. Like clearly.
And then I don't know if the sole question of Solaris is, can we understand the universe around us without first understanding what lies within? Do you think that's the sole question of Solaris? I think that's very misleading.
I think it is a question. Yeah, I think there's a line when we talk about mirrors.
It is a question.
I mean, Lem's big thing was, and he was very critical of American sci-fi, which is very easy to film, actually, because it generally requires a guy to get into a rubber suit and maybe have some like octopus legs as well. And I love that kind of sci-fi. I'll cop to it. It's great. And was pretty much the underpinning of classic Doctor Who back when that was good. So, yeah, that was kind of the thing that Lem didn't like, that we saw mirrors of ourselves. And I guess if you think about things like Star Trek, aliens are alien because they have pointy ears or green skin, but otherwise they kind of look like they live in California. So he was saying that, we would not find that. We would find something that we could not understand. And that was his big thing.
Yeah.
And I think that question about understanding ourselves and understanding the universe, I think that is a central focus for him. Because obviously...
I think there are 3 themes that I see in Solaris, and that would be self-deception and true motives, which I think is a big part of his body of work in general, human desire for discovery, and then communication with an alien species, which is to do with obviously understanding ourselves. So I do understand that as a question, but also if you cannot understand yourself, and it goes to the point of aliens having pointy ears, but they live in California. It's something so alien that if you can't even get to a basis level of understanding anything, there is no communication possible. I think that is what I see a lot in Solaris. And I know you wanted me to get to the synopsis by Alison Flood, but when I was doing research for this podcast, I actually pulled some letters from, he used to send lots of letters to his old translator. So it's very interesting that Martin and Kilcox got the English translation, because Michael Candle translated a lot of his other books.
From Polish to English.
And they seem to have a lot. From Polish to English, yeah.
Oh, that is odd,
He
isn't it?
translated The Cyberoid, Fables for the Cybernetic Age, The Futurological Congress, His Master's Voice, Mortal Engines, and A Perfect Vacuum. And I'm pretty sure that all of these, the translations were done before Martin and Kilcox got their hands on the English translation rights for Solaris.
Well, so the thing is, though, that Kilmartin and Cox translated from French to English. So they were obviously French fluent, but not necessarily Polish fluent. Why the publisher didn't just go to his Polish to English translator is one of those wonderful mysteries. We'll never know.
Okay, so letters from his longtime translator, Michael Candle, on self-deception and true motives. And this is Lem. The characters often deceive themselves about their motives, and it's through these self-deceptions that the deeper truths emerge. It's crucial to maintain this complexity in the translation. And then another, that was from a Stanislaw Lem reader by Peter Sversky. Apologies, Peter Sversky, if I'm mistranslating your name. Another letter. Our quest for new worlds is more a reflection of our inner voids and questions than a genuine curiosity about the universe. This philosophical underpinning should not be lost in translation. Lem, A Life Out of This World. And then, communicating with alien species. Translating the intricacies of human and alien interactions requires a subtle touch. We must ensure the sense of otherness and enigma remains intact, avoiding any oversimplification. End quote. By Lem in his own words, a collection of his letters to Michael Candle. So I really wanted to read those because I think they really encapsulate what Lem was trying to achieve in Solaris in those 3 big themes.
It's all very hypothetical, though, like in the sense that there are no alien encounters that we're aware of. I apologize to people who've had alien encounters. But, Lem was not talking about any kind of probing sort of situations. So what was he really, what was he really writing about? Because this was quite a focus for him. And I don't think it was a purely hypothetical idea. So I guess I'm wondering if the otherness is something to do with, the Cold War and the profound sense of otherness that existed in the world at that time and the difficulties in communication. I'm not suggesting that was like his whole thing, but it was such a point of focus for Lem throughout his writing career that one wonders if it could possibly be completely removed from what was at the time his real world context.
I think that is a great insight, because a writer is never removed from their environment all their times. And that was what was occurring in the world, the Cold War, these really intense ideologies. But I suppose across the wall, or the Berlin Wall, it could be alien or foreign, these other ideological concepts.
Well, East and West Germany, I mean...
Food for thought on that one.
They were completely separate, like profoundly culturally separated. Yeah. And obviously Lem was in Poland, which was had a communist government. And the way he was interpreted in America is really, really odd, I think, in today's internet age. But he was somebody's snoring. He was is that Lily?
Lily? Yes, of course it's Lily.
Dear, oh dear.
I'll cut it out, don't worry.
Lily the Hound having a snooze. It's not a great endorsement of the podcast, is it, when one of your listeners in real time is just snoring through the whole thing? Yeah. Although, again, I wouldn't want to reduce Lem's work to sort of just a sort of an exercise in political commentary, because I don't think that's what it is. But I do think that the life he was living, because, he was also a child of the war. He's almost died in the Second World War, and, did not have the easiest time of it. I think those things very much bleed into his work and his gallows sense of humor. He has a real gallows humor going on in his work, does Stanislaw Lem.
This is a gripe that I have had with the book. When we first started talking about this, Gareth, you said that the difference between the English-French translation and the English-Polish translation is that the French had butchered any sense of humour that Lem had.
That's what I'd heard, yes.
Work.
Because I hadn't read the Polish one.
You heard. Yeah. And so on this endeavour, I read the English to Polish version first by Bill Johnston, and then I read the French to English translation, and I find it very difficult to find humour in this story. Both versions have their strengths and weaknesses. Humour was not in either of those.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I was waiting for it when I was reading the direct translation. I was waiting for the yucks to come, but they never really did. I think it's stuff like, in the French to English. How are we referring to these? The Kilmartin Cocks. In the Kilmartin Cocks, you have a character called Snow. And then in the Johnston, you have a character called Snout. And Snout is meant to evoke the sort of personification of a pig in his characterization. So calling him Snout was indeed a humorous move on Lem's part, but it's pretty goddamn subtle. I mean, yeah, you wouldn't. I mean, I assume our listeners are not cracking up all over the joint having heard that. I think that's what he's talking about when he says that they took out all my humor. It's pretty subtle, and you could even describe it as dad jokes. So I don't know that it adds that much to the book, if it exists at all. But I agree with you. I mean, if I hadn't heard the thing about the humor, it wouldn't have even occurred to me as something to be considering.
Jumping into our synopsis from Alison Flood.
Yes, please.
Telling of humanity's encounter with an alien intelligence on the planet Solaris, the 1961 novel is a cult classic, exploring the ultimate fertility of attempting to communicate with extraterrestrial life. Psychologist Chris Kelvin arrives on the space station that circles Solaris to study the planet's ocean, only to start confronting a very real embodiment of his dead wife. Other crew members are also experiencing visions, and it emerges that the planet itself is sentient, drawing upon their memories.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think about that one?
I'm not sure what I think about that. Wait 1 second here. Let me consult my other brain. Able to perceive.
I don't think they ever
things.
truly conclude in the book whether the planet is sentient. As humans, we want to think of things happening for a reason.
Well, yeah,
And
because
if you believe that it's being done for a reason, is it being done out of a kind reason or a malicious reason? But then that, if it's not, it's just a reaction.
and it could just be a reaction.
I don't know if humans can really handle that concept. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think they arrive at a conclusion, and certainly because the thing I was unsure about with sentience was whether it implied a sort of a conscious awareness. It is possible that the Solaris Ocean is simply projecting things, like a mirror. It's not really clear one way or the other what it's doing, which is part of the fascination of the book, I think. So the only conclusions we could possibly draw are really around the characters, around Kelvin and Snow / Snout and Rhea / Hari. Because
Harry?
Yeah, because weirdly, like, so Rhea / I'm just going to call her Rhea, actually. I prefer the name.
I actually preferred Hari.
Well, you can call her Hari and I'll call her Rhea, and that'll just confuse the hell out of everyone. But although she's manifested by the ocean, I think she is a character and we can know her intentions without knowing its intentions. So that's an interesting thing too, which you don't normally see in any contexts. So quite an extraordinary book in that sense.
And it reminds me, in terms of knowing Hari or Rhea's intentions, I just finished watching the Solaris Russian version from 1972. And this has been a process. We've read 2 books, we've watched 2 movies, and a concept that came up in the 1972 film version is that as your memory or of your visitor, that's I think what they end up calling them, stays, there was this concept that they became more human as they stayed with their partner. And I can't remember that being in the book necessarily. Can you jog my memory on that?
No, it's not in the book.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But then what would you say is their intent or in their intentions, these visions or visitors?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Their intentions are reasonably clear. They want to stay with their host, with their person. And obviously they can't not stay with their person because they start to suffer. And that's about...
Oh, pause right there. Because now I do know this is in the book. You know Gibrarian, who is the supervisor or master of Chris Calvin, his visitor, my understanding, was a tall black woman. Gibrarian is dead, and yet she is still walking around the space station, and I could not grok this concept because there is a scene in the book where Chris tries to leave Hari in his room and she rips open the door and cuts open her hands, and it's quite a bloody scene. And yet this other visitor seems to be walking around. I don't know if that was an inconsistency that you picked up, that these are formed of the memories of the crew and yet are somehow in this instance living beyond that crew member or their host.
Well, the living beyond's not a problem because they are living. You know, they have a nervous system, circulatory system, brain, muscles, tissue, etc. They are absolutely living. One of the key things I think you notice is they don't have their feet particularly, like they have baby feet, as though they've never walked around before, which is cute, but slightly inconsistent, I think, because if I'm not mistaken, Rhea has a needle mark.
The scar.
Yeah, and so that's slightly. I found that slightly inconsistent.
But that was the memory of Chris, because if they are formed from the memory, that's something that would be front and center in his mind and his memory of Harry, her death, and where the needle went into.
Oh, yeah, no, it's more the other way. It's the baby feet that I find strange because...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I
suppose you don't really concentrate on your partner's feet.
You might. But certainly, I mean, all the things, all the signs of having lived... it just seems odd to me that like the sort of hands and feet were sort of babyish, because why not the rest of you then? And when I say babyish, I don't mean that they had two really tiny hands and feet, but just that they look like they hadn't done a lot of walking or manual labor. Like these hands, really, very little manual labor. Yeah, I thought that was a bit odd. The Jabrarian's visitor. So he died, and she doesn't just disappear because she's not a manifestation of his mind. Like, obviously, she's formed out of his memories, but she is formed out of some kind of matter. So he dies, she still sticks around, but I believe she does lie down with the corpse for long periods. So she wants to stay near him. I guess, I don't know, maybe she had to pop to the loo. Like, you just can't lie there forever, So presumably, like, she popped off to grab a bowl of soup or use the facilities. But I wasn't so troubled by that because she had no option. Like, he's not there to be with, really, and she was lying with his corpse at other times, which is very grim. But there is sort of small.
Because if all the crew members die, these manifestations cannot die, and they're just left there forever.
I would assume that
I don't know.
If, like Rhea, for example, comes back when Kelvin goes back to sleep. So obviously, if you're listening to this, spoilers are plenty. He does away with one version of her and another one appears. There's actually no evidence that the first one is dead. So there could be two Rays at that point. And they are certainly able, they're certainly able to die. So I would assume that if all the actual crew members of the space station killed themselves, these characters would still be there, very unhappy, and they might find various ways to terminate their own lives, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because if they were just ghosts, reflections, the kind of thing you would sort of see in an episode of Star Trek, that they disappear once the host mind is deactivated for some reason. It's a very different sort of idea. It's unsettling, I think. Very unsettling at times. One of the things that I always found weird about Lem, though, is that he says, it's not a love story. It's not about that. And he was certainly critical of the way the American film, the Soderbergh film in 2002, and also the Tarkovsky film in 1972, I think it was. Both had a fairly large focus on Kelvin's grief and love for Rhea. And I see that through his book. And I'm quite surprised that Lem always thought that it was overdone, because it doesn't seem overdone to me. It seems to reflect what he wrote in his book.
I did not find it to be a love story. I found it's very hard to explain this concept. I'll try my best. But I got from Kelvin that he was just so shocked this woman had come back, his wife, and then Harry tries to kill herself, and there's a repeat of that kind of timeline of Harry's life, not knowing who she is, if she is who she thinks she is, because she has these memories, and she has additional memories beyond to the time of her death pulled in from Chris Kelvin. And I just think a lot of the time, I feel like it was a horror book, that there's this embodiment of something that you loved that it wasn't it. It was still 19 years old because that was the age that she died at. And yet to make it feel better, you had to portray a mirror of love to it. And I did not feel any love.
I think that is initially what Kelvin's doing, but I don't think it is as time goes on. He even says,
towards the end.
Yeah, he says, I love you for you. I don't love you for who you appear to look like. I'm pretty sure we've got it in our quotes, actually, because I found that very interesting. Comment. I think it's what she wanted. I mean, if you discovered, tomorrow that you were a clone of the real Shannon, I think you seek validation. I would imagine so anyway. If I was a clone, I would want to sort of have the validation that I had some worth, other than as an organ bank or whatever I was existing for. I think we're heading into Ishiguro territory now, but I think the affection between them was genuine. I do think there's obviously nostalgic elements, and it's notable rather, that Kelvin, after 10 years, hadn't found anyone else, and when Rhea dispatches herself towards the end of the book, he says he doesn't think he will ever find anyone else. So I think this entity is possibly the love of his life. And I wonder.
But then his actions, if that's the case, his actions of going in with Sartorius's and Snout's plans to potentially annihilate Harry/Rhea and their other visitors, that's not the action of love.
Yeah, but you see, it's when he starts doing that he starts really turning and thinking he wants to sabotage the plan. Because, when he, whatever he says to her that makes her kill herself 10 years earlier, he grossly misunderstands who she is as a person. He doesn't think she will kill herself, and she does. And I suspect that had a profound effect on Kelvin. And you would imagine it would, but I think it's actually a very profound effect on him. And perhaps, I don't know how serious he was when he was, quote unquote, breaking up with her. But I think once he realized she'd killed herself, much of the way he understood her got unsettled. And I think regret was a massive, beyond just the usual, did I contribute to this person's death? I think perhaps his whole sense of her got radically shaken up by that incident. Then he gets her back, except it's not quite her. So I think that's the next her is the one that he's prepared to fall in love with, because he understands more about the one that killed herself 10 years earlier. So it's a mixed up sort of thing, but I read it as he genuinely is attached to her in a significant and genuine way. I mean, who knows? Love, it's a difficult thing to define, but no, he doesn't want her to disappear. And I mean, obviously, at the end of the book, he says he doesn't think she'll ever reappear to him. But he's going to stick around anyway to see what else Solaris has to say, sort of thing. And I just thought, you big liar, Chris Kelvin. You are hoping she reappears. I think that's what he's doing. I think he's on a sort of it's like a wake. And it's profoundly sad, but I think very romantic.
Yeah.
I agree, though. There's a lot of ghostly, horrific things too. It's a ghost love story, sci-fi, philosophical novel. I mean, what more could you ask for?
Agreed. And it's got everything. And depending on what version you decide to pick up and read, there are subtle differences. Did we want to talk about those?
Yeah. Before we do, though, I just want to very quickly the Alison Flood article that you read the synopsis from. So there's a quote from Bill Johnston talking about it. He was interviewed by Flood. And he says, "Much is lost when a book is retranslated from an intermediary translation into English, but I'm shocked at the number of places where text was omitted, added, or changed in the 1970 version," said Johnston. Quote, "Lem's characteristic semi-philosophical, semi-technical language is also capable of flights of poetic fancy and brilliant linguistic creativity. For example, in the names of the structures that arise on the surface of Solaris. I believe this new translation restores Lem's original meaning to his seminal work." Now, they talk about the Hari being Kelvin's lover. I don't know that they were married. Were they married? I don't think they were.
I thought it was husband and wife.
Oh, was it? Well, it was certainly, if not legally, it was certainly that nature of relationship. So, yeah, so they went with Raya in the French translation. And so in the direct Johnston translation, that's been changed back to Hari. Hari was a very exotic name for a Polish language reader in 1961. I don't know if Raya, which is an anagram of Hari, I don't know. For me, Raya is actually a much more exotic sounding name. I guess it depends on what your normal baseline is. I don't know what it would have been like for French readers. And you prefer Hari, Shannon?
Yes, I do. And Hari is also exotic. I can't say that I've ever met anyone with the name Hari, but I have with the name Raya.
I think part of my problem was I read it as Harry the first time. Here's my hairy lover. So yeah, and although I realized I'd misread it, I never quite managed to cope with it after that. So we're talking about things like that, and then the other thing they talk about is there are moments in the book where meaning is completely inverted. The question is whether that's actually meaningful or not. It sounds like it should be. And they give the example of Kelvin gets a note from Snow/Schnaut. Or rather, when Snow sends in the note, it's, quote, "Kelvin, things are looking up." When Schnaut sends in the note, it's, "Kelvin, we've gotten bogged down." And they are obviously completely contradictory statements. And yet, weirdly enough, in the context of the rest of the note, it doesn't make a bucket load of difference. And then the other thing that they talk about is that in the French to English translation, some of the dialogue is narrated. So instead of having direct dialogue, we have a description of what was said. And I'm going to just go on record right from the get-go and say that I think that was actually the better approach, because I think the direct, the Johnston version is a little dialogue heavy at times, and some of the dialogue is not as strong as other parts of dialogue. What did you think about that? Did you notice anything, or do you disagree?
I can't say that I noticed the dialogue to be an issue, because I started off with the heavy dialogue version first, so I'm not sure if that would make a difference.
Yeah, it probably would. But obviously it would potentially make a difference in either direction. It may be that I prefer that there is less dialogue because I'm more used to the Kilmartin Cox translation. That's a tough one. I guess our listeners and viewers should write some comments, tell us which is the correct way to go. because we can't tell. But we do have, I went through.
And also, like and subscribe because we have officially hit 100 subscribers.
Yeah, that's very exciting, isn't it?
Yeah,
100 subscribers.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. We've been having a lot of fun and we would like to continue doing this. I am not an expert on algorithms on YouTube, but all I know is more subscribers equals better visibility for the rest of our soon-to-be audience. So thank you, everyone. And now you can continue, Gareth.
Well, thank you, Shannon. So when I read this book, I thought, how am I going to do this? And so I read it in the most crazy way possible, where I would read a certain amount of one translation and go, now it's time to flip to the other one. Often a page, sometimes less than a page, occasionally 2 or 3 pages. Completely mad way of doing it. And, I've never quite recovered since. I hear two voices coming at me constantly now. It was a very interesting way to read it, though. And what I found was, because I didn't have a primary text, I mean, I did because I've read the Kilmartin-Cox one multiple times. But in the reading for this podcast, I didn't have a primary text. I made a real point to not put one over the other as I was reading through them. I'm just going to say from the get-go, in case anyone finds these quotes tedious, I think that one version is better than the other at times. I was being deliberately opaque there, but that's literally it. Like, at times, the Kilmartin-Cox is like, yep, that's the way it should be. And at other times, the Johnson is exactly right. Neither one of them, in my opinion, trumps the other particularly. And if I was a translator, or indeed if I was just me, I would be inclined to take both versions and make an extra Frankenstein version out of both lots, because I think you could get up an even better composite version out of the two. But there's more to learn from this than that. So now we were going to do it this way, right? I'm going to be the Kilmartin-Cox and you're going to be the Johnston, or would you rather be the Kilmartin-Cox and I'll be the Johnston? Because I'm pretty happy to be either.
Oh, I'll be the Johnston.
All right. So we've got a whole bunch of quotes here. I don't know whether we'll read them all. This first one's quite long, and it may not need to be. So we'll just see how we go. So this is the very beginning of both books. And so Kilmartin-Cox begins, at 1900 hours ship's time, I made my way to the launching bay. The men around the shaft stood aside to let me pass, and I climbed down into the capsule. Inside the narrow cockpit, there was scarcely room to move. I attached the hose to the valve on my spacesuit, and it inflated rapidly. From then on, I was incapable of making the smallest movement. There I stood, or rather hung suspended, enveloped in my pneumatic suit and yoke to the metal hull. Can I pass over to you now? This is kind of how I read this book. Can I pass over to you, Shannon, for the Johnston version?
At 1900 hours ship's time, I climbed down the metal ladder, past the bays on either side, into the capsule. Inside, there was just enough room to raise my elbows. After I attached the end of the cables into the port jutting from the side of the capsule, my spacesuit filled with air, and from that point on, I couldn't make the slightest movement. I stood, or rather, hung suspended in a bed of air, all of one piece with my metal shell.
So, which do you prefer as a sort of an opening salvo for this book?
I preferred the Johnson.
Why?
Beginning one on this one.
Why is that? Because they're pretty similar.
I think it comes down to the last sentence of the Kilmartin-Cox. There I stood, or rather hung suspended, enveloped in my pneumatic suit and yoke to the metal hull. I didn't like that sentence. And in terms of the vision of what I can see more, was better done in the Johnson version.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the last sentence of the Kilmartin-Cox is should be restructured, if nothing else. So it would be, there I stood, or rather hung suspended to the metal hull, enveloped in my pneumatic suit and yoke. Or you'd start with enveloped in my pneumatic suit and yoke. There I stood, or rather hung suspended to the metal hull. So there's some grammatical potential things there, but there's actually a much better reason, I think, why the Johnson one is better, and I agree it is better. It's this image, all of one piece with my metal shell. Just that. It's such an interesting idea that he sort of becomes part of the capsule. And it's a very Lem kind of thing. It's a much more radical way of thinking about it. And then we have things like, I might just read both of these because they're tiny. In the Kilmartin-Cox, with a muffled sigh of resignation, the spacesuit expelled its air. I was free. And then the Johnson one, with a soft hiss like a resigned sigh, the air left the coils of the spacesuit. I was free. So very similar. However, the Johnston one is a simile. The Kilmartin-Cox is a metaphor. And I prefer the metaphor. Again, it's a 5%er, really. But for me, the Kilmartin-Cox is a better way of expressing the same idea. Do you want to read the next one?
Oh, yeah, sure. The bulb, so I will read the Bill and Johnson first. Mm-hmm. The bulb fell from his fingers as they unclenched and bounced a couple of times on the floor like a ball. A splash of clear liquid spilled from it. The blood drained slowly from his face. Again, you have a simile in this one, but moving on to the Kilmartin-Cox. The flask dropped from his fingers and bounced several times, spilling a few drops of transparent liquid. Blood drained from his face.
So which one do you prefer out of those two?
After watching the movie last night, and there is a scene where the visitor of Snout throws a ball down the hallway, and this is a scene with Snout from memory. Because of the similarities between those two scenes, I preferred the Bill Johnston version. But in terms of its tightness, I do prefer the Kilmartin-Cox version.
So interestingly, I prefer the Bill Johnston version. And for me, it's a very simple thing. In the Kilmartin-Cox, you've got spilling a few drops of transparent liquid, blood drained from his face. Those two ideas are not connected, not really. Because of a couple of drops of transparent liquid, it's too many degrees of separation from the idea of the blood draining from his face. But a splash of clear liquid spilled from it. Now, the blood drains slowly from his face. That makes sense to me. Like the concept of a splash. I think it's more equivalent to the blood draining from his face. And I think that is what Lem is sort of doing there. He's paralleling the two. So for me, the Johnson one captures that, whereas I think the Kilmartin-Cox is too far removed and loses it. But again, we're talking about tiny things here, because either way, it wouldn't radically affect your sense of the book. There's a very key one, the next one. This is a speech. I can't remember if it's Snout or Kelvin saying this, but I'll read the Kilmartin-Cox, and then I'll hand you over to the Johnston, Shannon. So the quote is, "We are only seeking man. We have no need of other worlds. We need mirrors. We don't know what to do with other worlds. A single world, our own, suffices us, but we can't accept it for what it is. We're searching for an ideal image of our own world. We go in quest of a planet, of a civilization superior to our own, but developed on the basis of a prototype of our primeval past." I feel like that's Lem's central thesis right there. But what about, so the Johnston one though, does it capture it more clearly and, convincingly? That's the question.
We're not searching for anything except people. We don't need other worlds. We need mirrors. We don't know what to do with other worlds. One world is enough. Even there we feel stifled. We desire to find our own idealized image. They're supposed to be globes, civilizations more perfect than ours. In other words, we expect to find the image of our own primitive past.
So the question is, which one's better? For me, it's the Kilmartin Cox. I think it's a much...
I agree. And I would love to hear from our audience if we're saying that this is a central thesis of this book for Stanislaw Lem, which they prefer. But this concept of a primitive past doesn't fit as nicely as our primeval past. An idealized image. I think the Kilmartin Cox feels a lot stronger.
It does. I mean, when we've got there's supposed to be globes, civilizations more perfect than ours, that's I stumble over the globes. And also, we're not searching for anything except people. We don't need other worlds. I think the meaning is slightly different to we're only seeking man, the capital M. We have no need of other worlds. I feel like the difference there in the passive sort of sentence structure it is sort of understanding that we think we want other worlds. I don't think it is as clear in the Johnston one, where it sounds very definite and we're very sure of ourselves that we don't need other worlds, because then obviously what are we doing? Like questing out into the universe if we don't. I do like the idea that our world stifles us. I think that would have been something I would have maintained in the Kilmartin Cox translation.
One of the things that stood out to me quite a bit in the Solaris book, if you cut it down, a lot of the book is made up of him reading about Solaris. And there's this fantastic scene where he opens a book, finds another smaller book inside it, and then opens that again and finds another sheet of paper inside of it. And a lot of space is used to describe the history of Solaris, the transitions of understanding Solaris in our context of humanity, and then breaking it down into its smaller and smaller parts, and then cutting that out and going back again to original theories. And it just made me think that there's this planet, there's so much body of work and literature built on it, and we still don't understand. Is he making a point there that not so much literature or as much literature has been developed on humanity and we still don't understand ourselves?
Oh, that's very insightful.
If we don't understand...
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think that if we were able to interview him, I feel certain he would say that was a very insightful question. Wish I'd thought of it. I think that's right. I think that's right. I think it is a reflection of, in a way, the Solaris, the book, is a mirror itself. It's a book made. It's actually a book made up of mirrors. There's mirrors everywhere in Solaris. I think it is. There's been a great deal written about the human race, and yet we are mysteries. We are a mystery to ourselves. Let's try another one. This is another speech. So I bung these together. But just to be difficult, I'm going to read the Bill Johnston one. And I'll get you to read the Kilmartin Cox. Would you like to go first, though? We do Kilmartin Cox first.
What did that word mean to me? Earth. I thought of the great bustling cities where I would wander and lose myself, and I thought of them as I had thought of the ocean on the second or third night, when I had wanted to throw myself upon the dark waves. I shall immerse myself among men.
That's beautiful, isn't it? Okay, so here's the Bill Johnson one. But I had no home. Earth? I thought about its great, crowded, buzzing cities in which I would become lost, almost effaced, as if I'd gone through what I wanted to do that second or third night, thrown myself into the ocean where it rocked sluggishly in the darkness. I'd drown in people. Which one do you like better?
I love the final line of the Bill Johnston version where he said, I'd drown in people.
So do I. I think it's gorgeous.
But I prefer the rest of the Kilmartin Cox version.
We are entirely on the same page. Although I do like the way he says the ocean rocked sluggishly in the darkness. That's beautiful too. Then this is what I found reading the two just side by side. I kept thinking, yeah, you've nailed it. Oh, now Johnson's nailed it over there. That's great. Oh, no, hang on. I'm just kind of bouncing between them. There's actually a scene in the Steven Soderbergh Solaris where George Clooney it's quite early in the film as opposed to, because that little bit we read is quite late in the book. But I would bet my bottom dollar that Soderbergh was thinking of Kelvin drowning in people when he had this scene quite early on where George Clooney is working his way through a crowd. And I remember the first time I saw the Soderbergh Solaris, I was incredibly struck by that scene. I didn't realize why at the time because I hadn't read the book in a while and my memory is awful. But I was very struck by this simple scene of him trying to pass through a crowd. And it's raining, so it's very wet, and the crowd's very close. And he does seem to be drowning, like he seems to be desperately trying to wade through them. And I thought that was a wonderful use of this passage in that film, which, gets criticized quite a lot, but has a lot going for it, I think.
It is interesting because both the books, the different versions and the different films have different strengths and weaknesses. The Russian version, the beginning scene is him walking in the rain in a backcountry Russia is how I would describe it, for 30 minutes of the film. And it didn't have that same sense of drowning in people, but I suppose you do get a sense of a soul that is lost in a sense. And then the one with George Clooney, the blues and the reds as he's walking down the hallway of the spaceship. It's been a few months now since I've watched that film version, but I just remember those colours far more intensely than I did in the 1972 Russian version.
Yeah, I guess the Russian version has that sort of practical, sort of communist aesthetic. And you would imagine, actually, and I think it's probably in some ways more accurate, the space station would be run down and, pieced together with spit and baling wire. But there's something really visually arresting about the Soderbergh version. And, of course, there is an earlier version which was filmed in 2 parts, I think it was, for Russian television. That was 1968's Solaris. And that one's a lot harder to see. Curiously, I do have a copy. But, and it's...
How did you come by that, Gareth?
Oh, who remembers? It's all just lost in the mists of Solaris. But it's a very interesting version. It feels very much like a lot of 60s science fiction TV, like the sort of thing the BBC in England would do. And obviously it's quite flat most of the time because I think they were using those sort of TV cameras, which, big things on wheels. There are some lovely moments, visual moments in it. Like when we first see Rhea / Hari, it's done very well using shafts of light. Given the constraints they had in terms of budget and equipment and so forth, I actually think the 1968 Solaris is worth seeing. It's also a lot more faithful than the other two. What we run into, I guess, might as well talk about the films. I think what we run into is Solaris encourages mirrors. It seems to. It's like a book where one can see oneself and all kinds of things. And so with the film adaptations, I think there is a bit of this going on, a certain self-reflection. So with the Tarkovsky one, we have a sort of an image of Russia. I think, actually, I have a quote from Lem about Tarkovsky's one. Tarkovsky was crazy about the idea of filming Solaris. During those times, he was told by a number of high-ranking members of the Soviet Communist Party that one should not film this book, because this work is ideologically flawed, idealistic, subjective, and metaphysical. However, he would not listen to them, because Tarkovsky was entirely made up of this idealistic, metaphysical stuff mixed with a Russian soul. Hence, he was not a good addressee of such warnings. I have serious reservations regarding his film adaptation. Firstly, I would like to see the planet Solaris. Secondly, during one of our arguments, I told Tarkovsky that he never made Solaris, but Crime and Punishment instead. From this film, we gather that this horrible Kelvin guy led poor Hari to suicide and later had some remorse about it, while the latter was strengthened by her reappearance in strange and incomprehensible circumstances. What was just awful was the introduction of Kelvin's parents and aunt, but his mother was the worst, since this was a Russian mat, i.e. Rodina, the Mother Earth. This really angered me a lot. At that point, we were like two horses dragging the same cart in different directions. People's lives that we get to know at the station are no existentialist anecdotes, but grand questions concerning the place of humans in the cosmos. My Kelvin decides to stay at the planet without any hope, while Tarkovsky created a vision with some island and a hut. I'm quite irritated by this image. Essentially, that sort of sense of homecoming of Mother Russia, that's what we get in Tarkovsky's Solaris, and for me, it was a great disappointment. I agree with Lem. I don't think it was the right ending. In the Soderbergh one, we seem to be in heaven. We have Rhea saying, "You're forgiven for everything here," and I found that rather disturbing as well. It's overly simplistic, like the giant brain. It's kind of
like they've used this. Yeah, they both. So the American version, the Russian version, have planted their own ideologies onto Lem's book. Basically.
Yeah, because Solaris is a mirror. And one thing you can say for the 1968 TV version is it doesn't do that. Kelvin waits.
Oh, that's nice.
At the end, he's waiting hopelessly, perhaps, for Rhea/Hari to return. So that's a much more faithful adaptation. And I actually thought it was pretty good. Like, there was some good acting. I mean, it's a made-for-TV version in the 60s on no budget. So, some of it is not as strong as the multi-million-dollar film versions that succeeded it. But to be fair, I think for what they had going for them, they actually probably made the strongest version in some ways.
And I think this is a perfect time for one last quote.
Yeah, let's do a last quote.
I'll do the Kilmartin Cox one. And it's the last one. That liquid giant had been the death of hundreds of men. The entire human race had tried in vain to establish even the most tenuous link with it, and it bore my weight without noticing me any more than it would notice a speck of dust. I did not believe that it could respond to the tragedy of two human beings. Yet its activities did have a purpose. True, I was not absolutely certain, but leaving would mean giving up a chance, perhaps an infinitesimal one, perhaps only imaginary. Must I go on living here then, among the objects we both had touched, in the air she had breathed? In the name of what? In the hope of her return. I hoped for nothing, and yet I lived in expectation. Since she had gone, that was all that remained. I did not know what achievements, what mockery, even what tortures still awaited me. I knew nothing, and I persisted in the faith that the time of cruel miracles was not past.
Is that not profoundly romantic? I'll stay here in the air that she breathed, among the things that we both touched. Holy moly! Oh.
Well, this is what I found interesting, Gareth, was that the sense of romance only came out once she was gone. And it was going back to that theme of not knowing your own wants and desires until it's gone. So self-deception, I feel, happened a lot in this book, especially with Chris.
I agree with you, although I do think, I mean, he had declared his genuine love for her before she, I don't know if kills herself is the right word, and I'm not sure that's really what
Pure
I mean.
Annihilation.
Yeah, it's a sort of a bigger kind of thing, isn't it? But no, he had very much declared his love for her, and she understood that she had to basically get away from him because he would sacrifice himself to her. Hence, she drugs him and flees to do away with herself. I actually, I mean, yeah, I read it as a very profoundly romantic book from both sides, because, you know, Ray is not just a sort of a manifestation or an idealization of a memory. She does exist in her own right. I think she's a really interesting character, actually. But let me read the Johnston version and see if it has the same romance and heart-rending pathos that I feel is in the Kilmartin-Cox. Quote, "I didn't believe for a minute that this liquid colossus, which had brought about the death of hundreds of humans within itself, with which my entire race had for decades been trying in vain to establish at least a thread of communication, that this ocean lifting me up unwittingly like a speck of dust could be moved by the tragedy of two human beings. But its actions were geared towards some purpose. True, even this I was not completely certain of. Yet to leave meant to strike out that perhaps slim, perhaps only imagined chance concealed in the future, and thus years amid furniture, objects that we had both touched, in air that still remembered her breathing. In the name of what? The hope of her return? I had no hope. Yet expectation lived on in me, the last thing she had left behind. What further consummations, mockeries, torments did I still anticipate? I had no idea, as I abided in the unshaken belief that the time of cruel wonders was not yet over." Oh, it's beautiful.
Again, it's really, there's bits and pieces that I love from both this scene between Kilmartin-Cox and the Bill Johnston.
Yeah, I don't know which one I prefer. I think I do lean very slightly towards the Kilmartin-Cox on balance for that last passage. But it's a very near thing, and I think this was the big thing that I got out of doing this exercise. Supposedly, these translations are profoundly different, like in their bones, and I'm buggered if I can see it. I think you get an accurate sense of Solaris.
I don't think anyone has reviewed these books as much as us.
Well, I know that Lem felt that the Kilmartin-Cox really didn't capture his book. And yeah, I would have imagined that it would be a more profoundly different experience than it was. And I think that tells us something about translation, which is, unless the translator's just a total hack, books in translation do generally capture the spirit of the source material. That's what I've taken from this exercise. I was really expecting these translations to feel radically different, and I don't think they are.
And I think in conclusion, listeners, you can pick up either version and you'll get the Solaris that we both read. And I mean, like you said, there's very little differences between them to impact message that you receive from this book.
Yeah, and also, Lem, I mean, there's always the danger of the author reading. It's interesting to hear what Lem has to say, because Lem is a funny guy. He's quite prickly at times, but in a very amusing way. He says because he saw the Soderbergh version. He did see it because he passed away, I think, in 2006. So he did see the Soderbergh version, and he said this about it, much shorter quote. Although I admit that Soderbergh's vision is not devoid of ambition, taste, and climate, I'm not delighted with the prominence of love. Solaris may be perceived as a river basin, and Soderbergh chose only one of its tributaries. The main problem seems the fact that even such a tragic romantic adaptation seems too demanding for mass audience, fed with Hollywood pap. If in the future someone else dared a faithful adaptation, I am afraid the effects would be understood only by a tiny audience. Yeah, I mean, it's delightful, isn't it? But I got to tell you, I disagree with Lem. I think he did write a love story. I really do, and I think he's kidding himself. Frankly, I think he's self-deceiving. And there's an interesting thing here. We skip straight over it, but he talks about how he wrote the book, and it's worth hearing. I'd like your thoughts on it, Shannon. So he says this. I can say very little about the process of my writing in general. It seems that each of the books covers up the history of its creation. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It covers up the history of its creation.
Yeah, that's a big sentence, the grok.
And also one would imagine the motivations for that creation. So he goes on, the realization superimposes over the process of crystallization of the work. It is not always the case that a book is coded into my memory as a river of many tributaries with centripetal tendencies. Whenever I found myself in some rut and later rejected that path, everything that was before is completely erased. This was heightened by the fact that I tended to destroy all unused manuscripts. If I were to see these texts, I would probably be surprised myself by how the eventual shape of the book differed from what had preceded it. This was the case because I used the trial and error approach. The last chapter of Solaris had been written after a year's break. I had to put away that book because I had no idea what to do with my character. Today, I am unable to find this seam, the place where the book had been glued together. Moreover, I am unable to explain why I was unable to finish it for such a long time. So...
Oh, that is interesting.
Isn't it? Yeah, I thought best not hop off without talking about that quote. So I'll die on this hill. I think Solaris is a profound exploration of love and loss. And I think it's the most incredibly moving book, one of the most moving books I've ever read. And certainly it's thought-provoking to the max, and it raises ideas I've never seen anywhere else, and those are all amazing things. Nevertheless, I think the shape of the book is a love story, a very sad love story.
I'm sighing because, yes, I do think it is a love story, but I only felt the love in that final chapter, which is why I find this statement so interesting. Would you look at that service?
Wow, that was like a Solaris manifestation.
What?
That's crazy.
I know. It's great.
And look, it says love you
station.
on the cup, right at the end of the episode.
Oh, no.
Mirrors
You've
everywhere.
won this argument, Gareth. I would love to know what was happening in his life between those years of... Oh, that would be so interesting. I can't comment on the comment that you've just made, but I would just like to know more information because I felt the love at that last chapter. So I want to know what was happening in his life. Given that he's just specified that, what was that first line that was very breathtaking? Seems that each of the book covers up the history of its creation. That line in itself, you've got to spend a week just thinking about it.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, clearly he's talking about the unconscious creative processes that writers go through. And the fact that he destroyed earlier drafts and so forth is interesting too. Clearly he wants to be surprised by his own work, and I think that's not a bad thing, actually. Writers who seem to write extremely
we
meaningfully
actually did it.
tend not to, I've noticed. We had that with Agawa. She talked about not knowing where her stories were going when she started them. And they seemed so planned and plotted the way they intersected with each other. And Mariana Enrique said a similar thing, that she was going down different alleyways, exploring character, because the book was ultimately about characters. Of course, this was our share of night. So there's a bit of a thread here. We might be onto something.
Yeah, and I would encourage our audience to listen to another podcast that we did, and it was about writers destroying their own works. So we didn't bring up Lem in that conversation, but there you go, another author again. So another thread occurring there. It was not planned, like Yoko Ogawa's work. Finally, what would you give this book out of 5?
Oh, well, it's not a perfect book. It has some issues. However, and of course it can be read in multiple English translations now, which complicates things. I just think that science fiction, I enjoy science fiction, and I think it offers a lot of food for thought. But the writer who always captures the profound sort of emotional quality that can underpin science fiction concepts, the speculative, is for me Stanislaw Lem. I just think he does. And another book of his that I felt very strongly about that in the same way was Return from the Stars, which I thought was a profoundly emotional and troubling book with a real romantic kind of futility about it, which I think is very much in Solaris. So I'm banging on like this because I'm basically saying the book is not perfect, so it can't get 5 stars. But I think it's such a profound reflection on what it is to be human and what it is to love and lose. I want to give it 5 stars anyway and just break my own sense of reviewing system. So I'm giving it 5 because I think it's a book people should read, definitely.
Do you know what you just did there, Gareth? Reminded me of when you look up the weather and it says 14, but it feels like 12.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of what it is. Yeah.
I don't have such misgivings, so I am going to give it a 5 stars because to me a 5 star is awarded on the basis, did it move me and can I read it again? And it answers yes to both of those questions. And luckily for me, I can pick up 2 different versions depending on what day of the week it is, if I'm feeling like a 12-degree day or a 14-degree day.
Yeah, that is a beautiful thing. And I would be interested to see more translations. I think I enjoyed all 3 movie versions. None of them were definitive, in my opinion, and maybe that isn't possible. Maybe it isn't possible to do a definitive Solaris. Likewise, I'm not sure that you can do a definitive English translation. I'd like to see more, I say, to our listeners, translate this book and send us copies. I'll read them. An endless stream of translations. I think that would be fascinating.
Well, as everyone is waiting for, we've just finished Solaris, and I'm assuming everyone is waiting for our next book that we're going to be reviewing. Can I please have a drum roll, Gareth?
I'll give it my best.
Is Cruddy by Linda Barry. Now, this is a book that has been recommended to us by Jay, who is one of our favourite listeners, and he mentioned this in a prior episode that we did, but then a month ago, before this episode released, we did the good, the bad, the ugly book recommendations, and we thought, why not? We were talking about getting book recommendations. Let's take one from one of our fans. I'll give a quick synopsis on Goodreads. On a September night in 1971, a few days after getting busted for dropping acid, a 16-year-old curls up in the corner of her ratty bedroom and begins to write. Now the truth can finally be revealed about the mysterious day long ago when the authorities found a child calmly walking in the boiling desert covered with blood. The girl is Roberta Robeson, and her rant against the world, bounded by the cruddy top bedroom of a cruddy rental house on a very cruddy mud road, soon becomes a detailed account of another story, one that she has kept silent since she was 11. Darkly funny and resonant with humanity, Cruddy masterfully intertwines Roberta's stories. Part Easy Rider and part bipolar Wizard of Oz. These stories, the backbone of Roberta's short life, include a one-way trip across America fueled by revenge and greed and a vivid cast of characters, starring Roberta's dangerous father, the owners of the Knocking Hammer Bar Cum Slaughterhouse, and runaway adolescents. With a teenager's eye for freakish detail and a nervous ability to make the most horrible scenes seem hilarious, Cruddy is a stunning achievement.
Gosh, that's a pretty powerful synopsis, isn't it? I liked the Easy Rider reference and that sentence.
And part bipolar Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, you would have that on the front cover, surely. I don't know. We'll have to see when we get our copies. But I'd be shocked if that's not on the front cover. Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. Obviously, won't be getting it from Booktopia, sadly. But there are other options. Boomerang books. Yeah. So that's very exciting. I'll pick up my copy today.
Okay, well, I'm ready to drink my coffee, and next time, everyone, we'll be reviewing. Actually, what are we doing next time, guys? I don't know. Be a surprise, just like Lem likes to be surprised by his books.
I don't think it will be a surprise. I want to talk more about translation. I think translation is fascinating. And if I know our audience, and clearly I don't, they will want to hear about translation too. So I think that's what we should talk about. Interesting translations and what translation is all about.
Unless we get any comments otherwise, we'll be talking about translation in our next episode. Hey. Until next time, everyone.
Bye, folks.